the Legacy Standard Bible unboxing, and we shall commence with a quote from F.W. Foote, who was an atheist writer who lived from 1850 to 1915, and he describes Evangelical Calvinism in Flowers of Free Thought, first series, 1893. Their theology was hateful, an insult to man, and a blasphemy against God, if such a being exists. I believe that F.W. Foote was speaking of the theology of Reformed Baptist preacher Charles Haddon Spurgeon, who lived from 1834 to 1892. An interesting thing to note is that he was born about the same time as Pope St. Pius X. I like to call Pope St. Pius X the Charles Haddon Spurgeon of Roman Catholicism. Pope St. Pius X was born in 1835 and died in 1914. I like also to call Charles Haddon Spurgeon the Pope St. Pius X of Protestantism. Now, why do I do this? Because these two men were extremely similar in many respects. Both fought an anti-modernist crusade, St. Pius X in the Catholic Church and Charles Haddon Spurgeon within the Reformed Baptists and more generally within Protestantism. Charles Haddon Spurgeon called his anti-modernist crusade the downgrade crisis. Downgrade was Spurgeon's name for a slippery slope. He thought that evangelical Protestants in Great Britain were on a downgrade of sorts, on a slippery slope of sorts, that they were slowly succumbing and acquiescing to modernism. And why do I mention Charles Haddon Spurgeon? Well, Charles Haddon Spurgeon is a Calvinist, and John MacArthur is a Calvinist. Charles Haddon Spurgeon was a Baptist, and John MacArthur is a Baptist. Charles Haddon Spurgeon believed in the inerrancy and sufficiency of Scripture. John MacArthur believes in the sufficiency and inerrancy of Scripture. My view of Scripture is -10. In my view, Scripture is not just false, it's harmless. If Scripture were merely false, I would give it a rating of 0, but because it is harmful, I give it a rating of -10. Indeed, I think the Bible to be the most harmful book ever written in terms of damage done. It is possible to write a worse book, a more evil book, but it would not have the influence that the Bible has. The Bible is just the correct mixture of sugar and spice and all things nice to hook people in. And Oscar Wilde is reputed to have said, "When I think of all the harm that the Bible has caused, I despair of writing anything quite like it." And so, given that my theology is the opposite of John MacArthur's, given that my view of Scripture is the opposite of John MacArthur's, were we to ask John MacArthur to rate Scripture on a scale or spectrum ranging from -10 to +10, we can be sure that John MacArthur would give the Bible a rating of +10. And so John MacArthur has the highest view of Scripture. I have the lowest view of Scripture. And so you might be curious as to why I bought his version of the Bible. Well, as Foote said, their theology was hateful, and I think that evangelical and fundamentalist Calvinists, they revel in the hatefulness of their theology. They worship an evil God, and they are okay with that. Indeed, they rejoice and exalt in the evil of the God they worship. And so John MacArthur, he at some level knows that his God is evil, and he does not care. And so whenever he is translating the Bible, he is not going to try to soften it or to dilute the venom that's in the Bible. And so let us move on to two translation choices that distinguish the Legacy Standard Bible from other evangelical and fundamentalist translations of the Bible. In the Legacy Standard Bible, the tetragrammaton, or YHWH, is not translated as Lord, but instead the tetragrammaton is translated as Yahweh. So YHWH is translated as Yahweh. YHWH is not translated as Lord, but in the Legacy Standard Bible, YHWH is translated as Yahweh. Similarly, the Hebrew word ngaved is not translated as servant in the Legacy Standard Bible, but it is translated as slave. So in the Legacy Standard Bible, ngaved is translated as slave. And in the Legacy Standard Bible, ngaved is not translated as servant. That's in the Hebrew Old Testament. Whereas in the Greek of the New Testament, doulos is not translated as servant. Doulos is not translated as servant, but instead doulos is translated as slave. Doulos is translated as slave. And as I said before, their theology is hateful, so they don't care that they essentially worship a book that is a slave owner's manual, a book that has slavery in it, a book that endorses slavery, a book that tells you to sell your daughters as sex slaves. They don't care. Some evangelicals do care, and so they try to mistranslate ngaved as servant. They try to mistranslate doulos as servant, but these evangelical and fundamentalist Calvinists, they revel in how evil their God is. They revel in how evil and stupid their religion appears to outsiders. More moderate evangelicals, they kind of care how they are perceived by the outside world, which is why they mistranslate all of this here. But the evangelical Calvinists, they don't care about how they are perceived by the world. Indeed, James White says that the religion of evangelical Calvinism is insanity to the outside world, and so they just embrace this insanity. The inherent danger to evangelical and fundamentalist Christianity of translating the tetragrammaton, or YHWH as Yahweh. Now this is a quote, a very telling and insightful quote from Stephen Anderson. Now, when you're reading John MacArthur's New Bible, it says Yahweh is my shepherd, I shall not want. And it's just all the verses that you're used to are gonna just sound super weird now. This is a quote from the new fundamentalist, the new independent fundamentalist Baptist preacher, Stephen Anderson. And he continues, you know, that name, it just sounds weird, is what it does. This is a quote from the new independent fundamentalist Baptist pastor, Stephen Anderson. He continues, it makes the Lord, the God of the universe, it makes him just sound like some tribal deity or something, like it sounds like something you'd expect people to worship in India or Africa or Native Americans or something, like, oh yeah, they've got their god, their pagan god, Yahweh. So that's what it sounds like. It's unknown unto us as Christians. It's foreign to our New Testament. This is a quote from the new independent fundamentalist Baptist pastor Stephen Anderson. And here's a link to his video. I shall leave it down in the description. And yes, this is a very telling insight. Translating Yehovah as Yahweh, it kind of demotes Yahweh to, in my view, what he really is, a petty tribal deity of Iron Age Israelites, no different to other petty tribal deities like Thor or Zeus or stuff like that. We actually have evidence from the Dead Sea Scrolls that Yahweh is just a god that was the son of a higher god called El Elyon, and this is hinted at in the Septuagint, but they dug up an even older copy of the Hebrew Bible in Qumran, and it confirmed what the scholars had been thinking, that originally Yahweh was just a god that was the son of El Elyon, and El Elyon, or God Supreme, gave Yahweh the Israelite nation, and he gave the other nations other tribal gods. So it's interesting that Stephen Anderson picked up on this. But Stephen Anderson isn't an illustrious scholar like what Bruce Metzger is. And this is from the New Oxford Annotated Bible to the reader. The use of any proper name for the one and only God, as though there were other gods from whom the true God had to be distinguished, began to be discontinued in Judaism before the Christian era, and is inappropriate for the universal faith of the Christian Church. There's another very telling admission. I think Bruce Metzger is, although a moderate evangelical, I think he's still an evangelical. But this is a very telling admission because the Old Testament Jews began as polytheists, and then they became henotheists, and then from there they eventually became monotheists. And so in polytheism and in henotheism, one needs to distinguish his God, in this case Yahweh, from the other gods like Baal and other gods like that, Zeus, Saturn. So you had to give your God a personal name. And the personal name that the ancient Israelites or the ancient Judeans gave to their God was Yahweh, so as to distinguish Yahweh from Zeus and Thor and Saturn and Baal. Yeah, so now more from Stephen Anderson. Now when you're reading John MacArthur's New Bible, it says, Yahweh is my shepherd, I shall not want. And it's just all the verses that you're used to are gonna just sound super weird now. the independent fundamentalist Baptist preacher Stephen Anderson. And so that is actually what I am hoping. I am hoping that John MacArthur will weird evangelical and fundamentalist Christians out with this version of the Bible. I hope that they are shocked whenever they read of slaves instead of servants. And I hope that they are shocked whenever they read Yahweh instead of Lord. You know, I think John MacArthur has reinserted into the text a lot of its original venom. I think that the Bible is a venomous book. Some translations try to extract some of that venom, but I think that John MacArthur, being an evangelical Calvinist, I think he rejoices and exalts in the venomousness of the Bible. And so let us open it up. I got the large print edition because I'm coming into my 30s and my eyesight isn't what it was in my early 20s. Although it's still good, I don't need glasses yet. So try to get the plastic off. I got this, I think, a week ago, but I didn't open it because I wanted to make this video and it took a little while to prepare. So the Legacy Standard Bible, large print, wide margin, build your house on the rock. Therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine, and that's another thing, I think there's a mistake. They capitalize pronouns relating to deity. But I think there are times when we don't know whether these pronouns relate to the deity or not. I think the better practice, and the practice followed by the NRSV is, and the King James Version as well, by the way, but do not capitalize pronouns relating to deity. So therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock, and the rain descended, and the rivers came, and the winds blew, and fell against that house, and yet it did not fall. Italics represent a word that is not in the original Greek, but has to be supplied in English so as to make it into better English. And I think that this is an excellent idea, putting these words into italics. They are following the King James in this. And yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock. So, what more is there? And everyone hearing these words of mine and not doing them. Yes, and this, another thing, John MacArthur is a lordship salvationist, which means that Jesus Christ is your master, hence Master's Seminary. So Jesus Christ is your master, and you are his slave, you are his doulos, you are hodoulos to Christou in Greek, you are the slave of Jesus Christ. And I think in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus Christ says, you call me Lord, and yet you do not do what I tell you. And so this is a master-slave relationship that John MacArthur wants you to have with Jesus Christ, which I think is pretty disgusting and immoral, but his flock seems to like it. There are easy believism people like Stephen Anderson. He says, you know, just believe in Jesus. You don't need to do anything after that to be saved. But John MacArthur says, no, you are the slave of Jesus Christ and you must do everything that Jesus tells you. And so, yeah, that's another aspect of him translating ngeved in the Hebrew as slave and doulos in the Greek as slave, so as to underpin his lordship salvationism. And so the Legacy Standard Bible. I actually love the Bible as a work of literature and as a physical object, but my evaluation of its morality is -10. I think it's a very harmful book, a book that we need to deprogram ourselves, which is what Hector Avalos said should be the goal of Bible studies. The goal of Bible studies should be to deprogram people from revering this book. And so, yeah, it looks nice. I look forward to reading this now. I got this a week ago and was really wanting to open it up, but I couldn't because I wanted to make this video. And so I think I've talked enough about this. Okay, bye-bye.